The door was locked from the inside. The woman was dead. No weapon, no wound, no way out. Yet Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing room and smiled that small cat-like smile, because he knew the murder had already happened long before anyone entered the house. It happened inside her mind. Welcome to the story. Grab a strong cup of tea or coffee, take a comfortable seat, and let the little grey cells wake up. If chills and impossible crimes are your poison, then subscribe right now, because your support truly means a lot to us. And drop in the comments from which corner of the world you are watching this enigma tonight. Chapter 1. The Woman Who Died Twice. My friends, let us begin on a rainy October evening in London, 1936, at Whitehaven Mansions. Hercule Poirot has just finished a particularly satisfying dinner of sole meunière and is polishing his moustache with a silk handkerchief when the telephone rings. A man's voice, frantic, cultured but shaking, begs the great detective to come at once to Laurel Grange, a country house 30 miles outside London. The man says, "My wife is dead, but she was alive 10 minutes ago, and the door was locked and bolted from the inside, and there is no key." Poirot raises one eyebrow, listens a moment longer, and replies very calmly, "I come, mon ami. Impossible crimes are my speciality." 40 minutes later, a black Daimler sweeps up the gravel drive of Laurel Grange. The rain lashes the tall windows like angry fingers. Waiting on the front steps under a dripping umbrella stands Dr. Geoffrey Hamilton, a handsome, nervous man in his 40s. His evening clothes are soaked, his face white as paper. He leads Poirot and the other faithful Captain Hastings upstairs without a word. Servants huddle in the hall, whispering, eyes wide with terror. They stop before a heavy oak door on the first floor. It is locked. It is bolted from the inside with 2 heavy iron bolts. There is only one key, and Dr. Hamilton holds it in his trembling hand. He unlocks the door, pushes the bolts back, and they step inside. The room is a beautifully furnished bedroom, lit by a single lamp. Heavy velvet curtains are drawn against the storm. In the middle of the carpet lies Mrs. Eleanor Hamilton, aged 38, once considered the most beautiful woman in 3 counties. She wears an evening gown of midnight blue silk. Her eyes are open, staring at the ceiling. Her lips are slightly parted, as if she were about to speak. There is no blood, no mark of violence, nothing disturbed. On a small table beside the bed stands an empty crystal glass that smells faintly of bitter almonds. Hastings exclaims, "Good Lord, she has been poisoned!" Poirot bends over the body, touches the wrist, shakes his head and murmurs, "She is indeed dead, but the poison is strange." He sniffs the glass again. Potassium cyanide. Yet the dose in this glass would not kill a cat. He looks around the room with those sharp green eyes that miss nothing. The windows are fastened shut. The fireplace is cold and blocked. There is no other door. The bolts are still thrown from the inside. No one could have entered or left. Dr. Hamilton speaks for the first time, his voice cracking. 20 minutes ago we were all downstairs having coffee after dinner. Eleanor said she had a headache and came up to lie down. She locked and bolted the door herself. I heard the bolt slide home. 10 minutes later, her maid knocked. No answer. I came up, used my key, opened the bolts, and found her like this. She was perfectly healthy at dinner, laughing, talking, planning a trip to Egypt next month. How can she be dead? Poirot walks slowly around the room, tapping the walls, listening to the panels, examining the carpet. He even lifts the corner of the Persian rug and peers underneath. Nothing. Hastings cannot contain himself any longer. "But Poirot, this is impossible. Suicide, yes, perhaps, but the glass held almost no cyanide, and the bottle of tablets is full. Murder then, but no one could get in or out. The woman has died twice, once in the eyes of the world and once in reality, yet the same body lies before us." Poirot turns with that sudden brightness in his eyes. "Precisely, mon ami. She has died twice. That is the whole secret. He looks at the terrified husband. Tell me, doctor, when did your wife first die? Dr. Hamilton stares as if Poirot has lost his mind. What do you mean, first die? She was alive this evening. I swear it. Poirot smiles gently. Alive, yes, in a way. But the real Eleanor Hamilton, the one you married 10 years ago, she died long before tonight. Tonight, someone merely killed the substitute. A gasp runs through the little group in the doorway. The maid screams and faints. Hastings drops his hat. Only Poirot remains calm, twirling his moustache, lost in thought. And that, my friends, is how the greatest locked-room mystery of Poirot's career began. A woman dead behind a door bolted from within, poisoned, yet not poisoned, replaced, yet still herself. Somewhere in that quiet bedroom lay a secret room, not built of brick or stone, but hidden inside a human mind. But how can a person be replaced without anyone noticing? Who was the woman in the midnight blue gown, if not Eleanor Hamilton? And why did the murderer need her to die twice? We discover the answers in the next chapter, when Poirot begins to use his own words, opens the secret room in her mind. Stay with us. The game has only just begun. Chapter 2. The Photograph That Lied. Poirot asked everyone to leave the bedroom, except Dr. Hamilton and Hastings. The door was closed again, but not bolted this time. Rain still hammered the windows like an impatient visitor who would not be denied. Poirot stood in the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, staring down at the woman on the carpet. Then he knelt with surprising grace for a man who complained about his feet, and gently turned her face toward the lamp. The skin was still warm. He studied the perfect curve of the cheek, the small beauty spot just above the left corner of the mouth, the way the dark hair waved back from the forehead. He rose and spoke almost to himself. Beautiful work. Expensive work, the best that Vienna could offer in 1934. Hastings frowned. Vienna? Poirot nodded. Plastic surgery, mon cher. Not the crude patching of war wounds, but the delicate art that makes one woman into the perfect copy of another. Look at the ears. The original Eleanor Hamilton had a little lobe free at the bottom like a drop of water. This woman, the lobe is attached. A tiny difference, but to Poirot it screams. Dr. Hamilton sank into a chair, his face gray. You are saying this is not my wife? I am saying this was never your wife. Your wife died some time ago, and this woman took her place so cleverly that no one suspected. Not the servants, not the neighbors, not even the husband who kissed her good night. Hamilton shook his head violently. Impossible! We traveled together. She knew every detail of our life. She remembered our honeymoon in Capri, the name of my old dog, the scar on my shoulder from fencing at Cambridge, every secret, every laugh, every quarrel. Poirot gave a small, sympathetic shrug. All that can be learned, doctor. A clever woman, with time and money and the right teacher, can absorb another life the way an actress absorbs a role until she lives it without thinking. He moved to the dressing table and opened a leather jewel case. Inside lay a string of pearls. He held them to the light, then slipped them into his pocket without a word. Next, he took a silver-framed photograph from the mantelpiece. It showed Eleanor Hamilton laughing on a beach, her hair blown by wind. He studied it for a long time, then passed it to Hastings. Look at the eyes, my friend. In photographs, the eyes of the living have a spark, a reflection of the soul. These eyes are beautiful, yes, but empty, like painted glass. Hastings looked and felt a cold finger trace his spine.
By Jove, you're right. It's as if someone copied the face, but forgot the light behind it. Poirot replaced the photograph exactly as he found it. Then he turned to the doctor with sudden sharpness. "Tell me about the sanatorium in Austria 2 years ago. Your wife went there for nervous exhaustion, did she not? 6 months she stayed. When she returned, she was rested, calm, more beautiful than ever. The treatment was a miracle, you said." Hamilton passed a hand over his eyes. "Yes, the clinic outside Vienna. Very exclusive, very secret. She wrote to me every week. The letters were in her handwriting." "Were they?" Poirot's voice was soft as silk. "And when she came home, did anything strike you as different? A new favorite flower, perhaps? A dislike for a perfume she once loved? The way she held her cigarette?" Hamilton thought, then whispered, "She stopped smoking Turkish cigarettes, said they hurt her throat after the mountain air. And she began to drink China tea instead of Indian. I thought it was the doctor's orders." Small things, tiny stitches in a perfect disguise. Poirot walked to the window and stared out at the storm. Somewhere in those Austrian mountains, the real Eleanor Hamilton died quietly, perhaps of the illness she went to cure, perhaps by a pillow held gently over her face while she slept, and another woman, already prepared, already waiting, stepped into her skin and came home to Laurel Grange, wearing her jewels, laughing with her friends, signing her name without a tremor. "But why?" Hastings burst out. "Why go to such monstrous trouble?" "Because 20 million pounds go to such trouble, mon ami. The Hamilton fortune, one of the largest in England, passes only to Eleanor Hamilton, born Eleanor Carstairs. If she dies without children, everything goes to a cousin in Canada. But if she lives, if she signs a new will leaving everything to her devoted husband, then the money stays in this house." Hamilton sprang up, his face twisted. "You accuse me of murdering my own wife?" "I accuse you of nothing yet. But someone paid for the clinic. Someone arranged the substitution. Someone brought a stranger into this house to live your wife's life until the new will was signed. And tonight, someone decided the masquerade had lasted long enough." He moved to the body again, and with delicate fingers lifted the left hand. On the third finger was the ring gleamed. Poirot turned the ring slowly until the inscription faced him. "To E from G, forever, 1926. He gave a soft exclamation. "This ring is too small. See how it has pressed into the flesh. The real Eleanor had slender fingers. This woman had to force the ring on. Another tiny flaw in a perfect performance." A sudden crash of thunder shook the house. The lamp flickered. For a moment, the dead woman's face seemed to alter, to become unfamiliar, mocking. Poirot straightened, and his voice was suddenly steel. "Tomorrow I will telephone Vienna. I will learn the name of the woman who left that clinic 2 years ago wearing your wife's face, and then, docteur, we will discover who paid the bill. But tonight, the false Eleanor Hamilton has played her last scene. The secret room in her mind is empty now, and the real murder, the first murder, still waits for justice in a quiet grave under alpine snow." Outside, the storm began to ease. Inside, the bedroom the 3 men stood in silence, while the woman in midnight blue watched the ceiling with painted eyes that would never blink again. And the game moved forward into darker territory.
Chapter 3. The Man Who Never Existed. Morning arrived pale and exhausted after the storm. The house felt heavy, as if the walls themselves had not slept. Poirot came down to breakfast at 9 sharp, wearing an immaculate charcoal suit and a tie the color of gunmetal. His mustache looked freshly disciplined. Only his eyes betrayed that he had spent most of the night on the telephone to Vienna, speaking in rapid French and German to people who did not wish to be found. Dr. Hamilton was already at the table, staring at cold toast he had no intention of eating. When Poirot entered, the doctor stood up so quickly that his chair fell backwards. "Have you discovered her name?" Poirot raised one finger. "Patience, mon ami. Names can wait. First, we must meet a man who officially does not exist." He placed a small, passport-sized photograph on the white tablecloth. It showed a thin, dark man with clever eyes and a neat beard, wearing the white coat of a doctor. The stamp across the bottom read, "Clinic, Sonnenhof, Salzburg, 1933. This is Dr. Erich von Alten, the greatest living expert in reconstructive surgery of the face. In 1934, he vanished from Vienna. The Austrian police believe he went to South America. They are wrong. He has been living quietly in a village 20 miles from here for the last 18 months under the name Mr. Erich Alten, an English retired professor of languages." Hamilton stared at the picture as though it might bite him. "You are telling me this man created the woman upstairs?" "Created, perfected, and delivered her like a masterpiece, wrapped in tissue paper." Poirot sat down and helped himself to coffee. "He came to England with one patient and one purpose. The patient recovered beautifully. The purpose is written in the new will your wife signed 3 weeks ago, leaving everything to you." Hamilton's cup rattled in its saucer. "How can you possibly know about the will?" "Because yesterday afternoon, while you believed I was admiring your rose garden, I was reading the copy in your solicitor's office in Guildhard. A simple matter when one has a letter of introduction from Scotland Yard." At that moment the butler appeared, looking nervous. "There is a gentleman to see you, sir. Says his name is Alten and that you are expecting him." Poirot smiled like a cat who had swallowed the cream and the canary. "Show him in, please." Erich Alten, or Erich von Alten, was smaller than his photograph and older, but the eyes were the same quick, restless, brilliant. He wore a well-cut tweed suit and carried a soft hat. He bowed to Poirot with old-world courtesy. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" "I wish to see the men who can make one woman disappear and another take her place without leaving a single scar that matters. Sit down, doctor. We have much to discuss and very little time before the police arrive." Alten sat. His hands were steady, but a pulse beat rapidly in his throat. "I am a surgeon, not a criminal." "You are an artist who accepted a commission. The fee was £100,000, half paid in advance, half on completion. Completion was last night, when the false Eleanor died and the fortune became safe." Alten smiled without humor. "You have an excellent imagination." Poirot leaned forward. "Let us imagine together, then. In 1934, a woman is dying in your clinic. Rich English husband, desperate. You are offered a fortune if you can save her. But she cannot be saved. Yet the husband does not want her money to leave the family. So you propose a miracle. Find a woman of similar age and build, coloring. Rebuild her face bone by bone, cartilage by cartilage, until she can walk out as Eleanor Hamilton, reborn. The real Eleanor is buried quietly under another name. The new Eleanor returns to England, signs whatever papers are needed, and one day dies naturally. No suspicion, no scandal, money stays where it is wanted." Alten shrugged. "Pretty fairy tale." "Not quite fairy tale.
The woman you chose for the substitution was your own mistress, Ilse von Hoffen, Austrian actress fallen on hard times. You trained her for a year, taught her English manners, English memories, English laughter. Then you carved her into Eleanor Hamilton. But even the greatest artist makes one mistake. He reached into his pocket and laid the string of pearls on the table between them. These pearls belong to the real Eleanor. They are perfectly matched except for one slightly Baroque pearl near the clasp. Your Ilse wore them last night, but she wore them the wrong way round. The Baroque pearl was hidden against her neck. Only someone who had never worn them daily would make that mistake. Alton stared at the pearls as if they were seeing a ghost. Poirot continued softly. Ilse played her part too well. She began to enjoy being a rich English lady. Perhaps she threatened to stay forever. Perhaps she asked for more money. So last night, someone dissolved a pinch of cyanide in her bedtime glass. Not enough to kill, only enough to paralyze. Then, while she lay helpless, a cushion was pressed gently over her face until she stopped breathing. The glass was rinsed and a harmless trace left behind. A perfect, impossible murder to hide a murder 2 years old. Silence filled the morning room. Outside, a black police car crunched up the drive. Alton looked suddenly tired. You were very clever, Monsieur Poirot. Too clever. Yes, I built her, but I did not kill her. That was the husband's work. He could not bear to share the money any longer. Hamilton made a choking sound and lurched toward the door, but Hastings was already standing in it, arms folded. Poirot rose. The circle closes, Doctor. The false wife is dead. The real wife will have justice at last, and the man who never existed will exist again in the dock at the Old Bailey. He turned to the window where weak sunlight was breaking through the clouds. 3 murders in one. The murder of identity, the murder of love, and the murder in the locked room. All because someone believed money could buy another man's life and wear it like a coat. But even the most perfect coat has loose thread somewhere, and Hercule Poirot, he always finds the thread. The police entered quietly. Alton did not resist. Hamilton began to cry without sound, tears running down his face like a child caught stealing. And in the bedroom upstairs, the woman in midnight blue continued to stare at the ceiling with eyes that had never been beautiful once, but now belonged to no one at all.
Chapter 4. The Letter That Arrived Too Late. The inquest was held 3 days later in the village hall. The coroner recorded death by cyanide poisoning or persons unknown. The newspapers called it the locked room of Laurel Grange and printed photographs of the beautiful dead woman until the public grew tired of her face. Poirot read every report with a small frown and said nothing. On the 4th morning, a thick cream envelope was delivered to Whitehaven Mansions by special messenger. It bore an Austrian postmark and the crest of Klinik Sonnenhof. Poirot slid it open with a silver knife and drew out 6 pages written in a neat continental hand. He read them once quickly, then again slowly, while Hastings watched the expressions chase across his friend's face. Surprise, satisfaction, and finally something very like sorrow. When he finished, Poirot folded the letter and placed it in his pocketbook and announced, "We return to Laurel Grange this afternoon, mon ami. There is one more room to open, and it is the most painful of all." They arrived as dusk was falling. The house looked smaller, stripped of mystery. A constable guarded the front door. Inside, the air smelled of dust and sealed grief. Poirot went straight to the bedroom that had been locked from within. Yellow police tape still crossed the doorway like a warning. He stepped over it and stood where the body had lain.
Then he walked to the wardrobe, opened it, and pushed the hanging dresses aside. At the back was a narrow panel. He pressed a small brass catch, and the panel slid sideways, revealing a cavity no larger than a suitcase. Inside lay a tin box painted pale blue. Poirot lifted it out with reverence and carried it to the dressing table. The lock was already broken. He raised the lid. Photographs, dozens of them. The real Eleanor Hamilton at every age, a child on a pony, a debutante in white, a bride radiant beside Geoffrey on their wedding day, Eleanor pregnant, smiling at the camera with one hand on her belly, Eleanor thinner, paler, in a hospital bed in Vienna, holding a newborn baby wrapped in a shawl. Beneath the photographs lay a single sheet of onion skin paper covered in hurried pencil. Poirot began to read aloud in a voice so quiet Hastings had to strain to hear. "My dearest Geoffrey, if you are reading this, then I am already gone, and the lie has begun. They told me this morning the cancer has won. 6 weeks, at most. But there is something I must confess before the drugs take my mind. The baby was not yours. I loved you, but I loved another more. The child died with me in that clinic. They buried her under my name in the little cemetery behind the pines. I could not bear for you to lose everything because of my sin. So I agreed to the plan. Let another woman wear my face and keep you safe. Forgive me. I wanted you to have the money and the life we dreamed of, even if I could not be in it. All my love forever. Eleanor." The last page was dated 4 days before the real Eleanor was supposed to have left the clinic cured. Hastings felt his throat close. Good God! She arranged her own replacement. Poirot closed the box gently. She paid the price twice, first with her life, then with her name. The woman who died in this room was murdered, yes, but the greater crime was that Eleanor Hamilton was erased while she still breathed. Her husband never mourned the real woman, only the fortune he thought he might lose. He placed the box in his briefcase. This goes to the Austrian police. The grave will be opened. The child will be found beside her mother. The records will be corrected. Eleanor Carstairs Hamilton will rise from the snow after all these years and be buried properly under her true name. They left the room and walked down the wide staircase. At the bottom, Dr. Hamilton waited, flanked by 2 detectives. He looked smaller, broken. Poirot stopped in front of him. "Your wife loved you enough to vanish so you could keep what was never yours by right. That is the tragedy here, Docteur. Not the locked room, not the clever surgery. The tragedy is that you accepted the gift and then killed the messenger." Hamilton lifted his head. His eyes were red, but dry. "She wasn't Eleanor. She laughed at me behind those borrowed eyes. She said one day she would tell the world the truth and watch me hang. I only meant to frighten her with the cyanide. When she fell asleep, I panicked. The cushion was already in my hand." Poirot looked at him for a long moment, then turned away. Outside, night had fallen completely. The gravel crunched under their shoes as they walked to the car. Hastings asked quietly, was there ever really a secret room in her mind? Poirot paused with his hand on the car door. "Yes, mon ami. It was the room where the real Eleanor lived on after deathbed, writing letters she knew would never be read in time. A room built of love and guilt and unbearable kindness. The cruelest prison of all, because she locked herself inside willingly." The Daimler pulled away from Laurel Grange. In the rear window, the house shrank to a single lit square, then vanished into darkness. And somewhere far away, under Austrian pine trees, a small grave waited for its name back.
Chapter 5. The Cousin from Canada. 2 weeks after the confession, the snow began to fall on London, thick, soft, and silent as forgiveness that never granted. Poirot sat in his flat before a small fire, turning a telegram over and over in his manicured hands. It had arrived that morning from Toronto, and it was signed simply David Carstairs. He arrives tomorrow on the Empress of Britain. He wishes to meet the man who gave his cousin back her name. I have agreed. Pack an overnight bag, Hastings. We travel to Southampton to greet the heir who never expected to inherit. They stood on the windy dock the next afternoon, watching the great liner nose through the mist. Among the passengers who came down the gangway was a tall young man in a camel-hair coat with the kind of face that looked honest even in passport photographs. He carried one suitcase and no bitterness at all. David Carstairs shook Poirot's hand with a grip that almost hurt. My mother always said Eleanor was the brave one in the family. I never understood how brave until your letter came. Over tea in the ship's first-class lounge, he told them the rest. Eleanor had written to her aunt in Canada from the clinic, but the letter had been intercepted by someone paid to watch the post. Another letter, sent months later, reached Toronto the day after the false Eleanor died in England. In it, Eleanor begged her family to forgive her silence and promised she would come home once she was strong enough. She never had the chance. David looked out at the gray channel. All those years, my mother kept Eleanor's room ready, fresh flowers every Sunday. She died last year, still believing her niece was happy in England. I promised I would find out why the letter stopped. I never dreamed of scandal or kidnapping. Instead, I find my cousin murdered herself so a man could keep money that was always meant for me. Poirot stirred his chocolate, and now the money is yours after all. David gave a small, tired smile. 20 million pounds I never wanted. I'm a schoolmaster, Poirot. I teach Latin to boys who would rather play football. I have a little house, a garden that grows good roses, and a dog that answers to Horace. That was enough. Now I must decide what to do with the fortune built on my cousin's disappearance. He reached into his coat and laid a photograph on the table. It showed Eleanor at 19, standing between David and his mother at Niagara Falls. She was laughing into the spray, her hair plastered to her cheeks, alive in every inch. This is how I remember her, not the woman in the newspapers. I want the world to remember her this way, too. Poirot studied the picture for a long time. Then he said quietly, "There is one more duty before the money is yours. Come with us to Austria. There is a grave that needs a proper stone." They traveled together 3 days later. The little cemetery behind Kleenex Sonnenhof lay under deep snow. The caretaker, an old man with a limp, led them to a corner where pines kept watch. A plain wooden cross bore the name Anna Müller, 1934, beloved patient. David knelt and brushed the snow away. Beneath the cross lay a smaller mound, almost invisible. The child. He did not cry. He simply took off his scarf and laid it across both graves like a blanket. Then he stood and spoke the first line of the Aeneid in the clear voice he used for sixth-form boys. Arma virumque cano. Of arms and the man I sing. Poirot felt something tight in his chest loosen. Beside him, Hastings blew his nose loudly and pretended it was the cold. When they turned to leave, David paused. "I have decided what to do with the money. The house in England will be sold. Half the fortune will create a hospital for women with the illness that killed Eleanor. The other half will pay for girls to study medicine. Every scholarship will carry her real name, not the one stolen. She wanted someone to live the life she could not. Let it be hundreds of someones." He looked at Poirot with sudden shyness. "Would you open the hospital, Monsieur Poirot? Cut the ribbon, say a few words. My cousin trusted your judgment above all others." Poirot bowed. "It will be my honor." Spring came early that year. On a bright May morning, the Eleanor Carstairs Hospital for Women opened its doors on a hill above Salzburg. The building was light and modern, with wide windows that looked toward the mountains she had loved. David Carstairs stood beside Poirot on the steps while photographers flashed and journalists shouted questions. Poirot waited until the noise died down, then spoke only a few sentences. "Today, we do not celebrate money. We celebrate courage. A woman who loved wrongly but loved greatly, who chose to vanish so others might keep what they treasured, who built with her own ending 1,000 new beginnings. Look at these walls. They are her true face." He stepped aside. On either side of the entrance stood 2 bronze plaques. One carried the laughing girl from Niagara Falls. The other showed simply a mother and child outlined against snow. Beneath, in letters that would never fade, ran the words, "In memory of Eleanor Carstairs Hamilton and her daughter. They gave everything so others might live." David pressed Poirot's hand once hard, then turned to greet the first patients. Later, on the train back to England, Hastings asked, "Was justice done after all?" Poirot watched the Alps slide past the window. "Justice is a cold word, mon ami. What we gave Eleanor was warmer. We gave her back her name, her child, and a legacy that will outlive every lie ever told about her. That is not justice. That is resurrection." He leaned back, closed his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, the little gray cells were perfectly quiet. Outside, the mountains turned gold in the evening light, and somewhere, a woman who had died twice was finally and forever alive.
Chapter 6. The Second Locked Room. 10 months later, on a raw November evening in 1937, Poirot received a telegram that made even his mustache droop with disbelief. "Come at once, stop. Another impossible murder, stop. Same house, stop. Same room, stop. Same bolts drawn from within, stop. David Carstairs." Hastings dropped his newspaper. "Good Lord! Not Laurel Grange again. The place is cursed." Poirot was already reaching for his overcoat. "Cursed, no, mon ami. Merely unfinished." They arrived after midnight. The house had been empty since the sale. Windows shuttered, furniture under dust sheets, yet every lamp on the first floor blazed. David Carstairs met them at the door, looking as if he had seen the dead walk. His face was chalk white, his Canadian calm shattered. "She's in there," he whispered, pointing up the staircase, exactly where the false Eleanor lay. "Same position, same empty glass, same bolts drawn from within. Only this time, the dead woman is the housemaid who stayed on to keep the place aired, Mary Donovan, 26 years old. No enemies, no reason." Poirot climbed the stairs slowly, his patent leather shoes making no sound. The bedroom door stood open. Inside, everything was as David had described. Mary Donovan lay on her back in the center of the bare carpet, wearing a plain black dress and indoor shoes. Her red hair spread like a fan. Her eyes stared upward with the same mild surprise the false Eleanor had worn. The heavy oak door was still bolted, top and bottom, from the inside. The windows were locked and shuttered against winter. On the mantelpiece stood one crystal glass, rinsed clean, but carrying the faintest ghost of bitter almonds. Poirot knelt, examined the bolts, then the body, then the glass. He rose and spoke very softly. "This time, the dose was large enough. She is truly poisoned. Yet the door, the windows, the chimney, all impossible. And the key is on the outside, where Mary herself left it when she locked up last night." David's voice shook. "I came down from London this morning to collect some papers. The housekeeper let me in. We found her together. No one has lived here since you left last year. Mary only came once a week to dust and air the rooms. She was alone in the house all yesterday afternoon."
Hastings looked around the stripped room. But why would anyone kill a housemaid in the most famous locked room in England? Poirot's eyes glittered. Because the room itself is the weapon, mon ami. Someone wishes the world to believe the curse of Laurel Grange continues. Someone wishes the past to rise again and choke the future. He walked to the wardrobe, opened it, and ran his fingers along the back panel. The hidden cavity was still there, but empty now, the blue tin box long removed. He closed the door thoughtfully. David said, I have sold the house. Contracts were signed yesterday. The new owner is an American film company. They want to make a picture called The Woman Who Died Twice. They begin shooting in January. They asked me to keep this quiet until then. Poirot gave a sudden sharp exclamation. That is it. The motive is not money this time. It is fear. Fear that the truth we buried so carefully will be dug up again on celluloid for the world to laugh at. He turned to David. Who knows the full story besides us three? Only one other person, the screenwriter, a young woman named Claire Lambert. She was given every newspaper clipping, every court transcript. She even interviewed Dr. Hamilton in prison before he hanged himself last month. Poirot's face hardened. Bring Mademoiselle Lambert here tomorrow morning, and do not tell her why. David hesitated. She is in London. She is also my fiancée. Poirot merely raised an eyebrow and said nothing. The next morning, a small sports car roared up the drive. Claire Lambert stepped out, tall, blonde, vivid, wearing a camel coat and scarlet beret tilted at a dangerous angle. She carried a notebook and the bright confidence of someone who believes life is a story she is writing. David introduced her. She shook Poirot's hand with a firm grip and smiled straight into his eyes. So, you are the famous Hercule Poirot. I have read everything about you. I was hoping we would meet before I finished the script. Poirot bowed. And now we meet in the very room where your drama began. Tell me, mademoiselle, when did you last visit Laurel Grange alone? Her smile faltered for the first time. About 3 weeks ago. I wanted to feel the atmosphere at night. And did you feel it? She laughed nervously. I felt cold and foolish and left before midnight. Poirot moved closer. You felt something else also. You felt guilt. Because you learned a detail the newspapers never printed. You learned that the real Eleanor arranged her own disappearance out of love, and you decided that was not tragic enough for Hollywood. You decided to add one final impossible murder to prove the house itself was evil. You wanted your screenplay to end with a shiver, not with forgiveness. Claire went very white. That is absurd. Poirot lifted the crystal glass from the mantelpiece. This glass was washed with care. Yet a trace remains. The trace matches the cyanide crystals missing from the gardener's shed where rat poison is kept. The gardener is your uncle, is he not? He lent you the key to the shed last month. David made a strangled sound. Poirot continued softly. Poor Mary Donovan trusted you because you were the new owner's fiancée. You asked her to meet you here yesterday to discuss wages. You gave her a cup of tea laced with the poison. When she fell, you arranged the body exactly as the false Eleanor had lain. You drew the bolts, threw the key out through the letterbox downstairs where you could retrieve it later. Then you left by the secret way. He walked to the fireplace, knelt, and pressed a knot in the oak paneling beside the hearth. A narrow section swung inward, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. The priest's hole. Built in Elizabethan times, it leads to a passage under the rose garden and comes up in the old ice house. I found it the first time I was here, but kept silent because it was not needed then. Yesterday it was needed very much. Claire stared at the black opening as if it were a mouth. You planned everything, he said, almost gently, even the timing, so that the murder would be discovered after the contracts were signed and the film announced.
You wanted the world to talk of nothing else. But you forgot one thing. Hercule Poirot does not like his truths turned into melodrama. Claire's courage broke. She turned to David, tears sudden and furious. I only wanted the story to be bigger than life. I wanted us to be famous together on the posters. I didn't mean her to die. I only gave her enough to sleep. When she stopped breathing, I panicked and staged everything. David looked at her as if he were a stranger wearing his lover's face. Poirot signaled to the constable waiting in the corridor. The girl went quietly, hands held out for the cuffs. As the police car drove away, David stood in the empty bedroom and spoke to the silence. Two women dead in the same spot for the same reason, so that someone else could keep a fortune or a reputation. History repeats itself after all. Poirot placed a hand on his shoulder. No, mon ami, history stumbles. But sometimes, just sometimes, someone is there to catch it before it falls again. They closed the door of Laurel Grange for the last time. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and pitiless, covering the footprints of everyone who had ever tried to escape the past. And the house waited patient as ever, patient for the next dreamer who believed a perfect crime could stay perfect forever.
Chapter 7. The Night the House Burned. 6 months passed. The American Film Company quietly canceled the picture. Laurel Grange stood empty again, its windows blind, its chimneys cold. The village children called it the cursed house now, and crossed themselves when they passed the gates. Then, on a windless night in May 1938, the sky above the hill turned orange. By the time the fire engines roared up the drive, the roof was already falling in. The old beams, dry as bone after centuries, burned with a hunger that water could not quench. By dawn, only the blackened shell remained, smoke drifting over the roses like a funeral veil. Poirot read the news in the Times over breakfast and laid the paper down with a sigh that was almost relief. Hastings looked up. Tragic, of course, but perhaps for the best. That house had drunk enough blood. Poirot buttered a croissant with delicate precision. Blood, no, mon ami. Lies. And lies, like dry timber, burn very well when the spark finally arrives. He reached for an envelope beside his plate. It had been delivered by hand at 7 that morning. Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper and a brass key still warm from someone's pocket. The note was written in a careful, educated hand. Monsieur Poirot, the house is finished tonight. I could not let the cameras come. Some stories must end in ashes so the truth can breathe. Thank you for teaching me that mercy can be fiercer than justice. D.C. Hastings stared. David Carstairs set fire to his own inheritance? Poirot slipped the key into his waistcoat pocket. He preferred clean fire to another poisoned glass. The money is already safe in trusts and scholarships. The land will be sold to the county for a public park. Nothing remains that can be twisted into spectacle. He has chosen the only locked room no murderer can ever use again. He rose and went to the window. London lay glittering under early sunshine. Sometimes, mon ami, the kindest thing a man can do with a house full of ghosts is to give them warmth at last and let them go. That afternoon, Poirot took the train to the village alone. The ruins still smoked gently. Firemen moved among the stones like priests after a sacrifice. David Carstairs stood on the lawn, coatless despite the chill, watching the last of his cousin's prison disappear. Poirot joined him without speaking. Together they looked at the blackened rectangle where the bedroom had been. Nothing was left except the stone hearth and the twisted iron of the bedstead. David spoke first, voice low. I dreamed of her last night. The real Eleanor. She was standing in the rose garden, laughing, the way she did at Niagara. She said thank you, and then she walked into the fire without fear. When I woke, I knew what I had to do." He held out his hand. On the palm lay a small object rescued from the ashes, the Baroque pearl from Eleanor's necklace, now smoked almost black. "I want you to have this, so you remember that even perfect lies leave one flaw." Poirot closed the younger man's fingers over the pearl. "Keep it. Plant a white rosebush where the bedroom stood. Every year, on the day she truly died, it will flower for her, and for the child, and for poor Mary Donovan, too. That is memorial enough." David nodded, unable to speak. They walked together down the ruined drive. Behind them the smoke thinned and drifted away on a soft May wind, carrying centuries of secrets with it. At the gates, David paused. "There is one last thing. The hospital in Salzburg sent word yesterday. The first-year scholarships in Eleanor's name have been awarded to 37 young women. The youngest is 16, daughter of a Viennese seamstress. She wants to be a surgeon." Poirot's eyes brightened. "Then the story does not end in ashes after all. It ends in scalpel and suture and new life cut from old pain. That is the finest, impossible crime of all." He raised his hat to the smoking ruin one final time and turned toward the station. Over the coming years, the rosebush grew strong and wild. Its flowers were purest white, with the faintest blush at the heart. Villagers left small bunches on the low wall every spring without knowing quite why. And travelers, passing on the London train, sometimes noticed an elegant little man in an old-fashioned overcoat, standing at the window, gazing toward a green hill where only roses now kept watch. He was always smiling.
Chapter 8. The Woman Who Never Slept. Years slid by. The war came and went. Bombs fell on London, but Whitehaven mansions stood untouched, as if even the Luftwaffe respected Poirot's mustache. The little Belgian grew older, his steps slower, his waistcoat a fraction tighter. Yet the green eyes remained sharp, and the little gray cells refused retirement. One cold afternoon in February 1952, a letter arrived in an envelope so thin it seemed to weigh nothing at all. The handwriting was spidery, almost illegible, and the postmark read, Salzburg. Poirot slit it open with the same silver knife he had used 40 years earlier and read the single paragraph twice. Monsieur, she is here, the woman who never sleeps. She asks for you by name. Come before the snow melts, or it will be too late. Sister Magdalena, Eleanor Carstairs Hospital. Hastings had died the previous autumn, so Poirot traveled alone. The train to Salzburg was heated and comfortable, but he felt the years in every jolt of the wheels. At the hospital, a young nun met him, face pale with something deeper than winter. She waits in the East Wing. We keep her door open now. She will not try to leave. She only repeats one sentence. Tell Poirot the secret room is collapsing. They walked through corridors that smelled of pine disinfectant and hope. The East Wing was quiet, reserved for patients no medicine could reach. At the end of the corridor, a door stood ajar. Inside, propped against white pillows, sat an old woman whose face Poirot recognized before she even turned her head. The bones of the face were the same, refined by surgery long ago, now softened by time. The eyes were still the clever, restless eyes of the Austrian actress who had once worn Eleanor Hamilton's skin like a perfect dress. Ilse von Hofen, the false Eleanor, the woman who was supposed to have died in the locked room in 1936, was alive and breathing and 80 if she was a day. She looked at Poirot and smiled the small, crooked smile he remembered from a storm-lit bedroom. "You came. I knew you would. The house burned, but the mirror survived." Her voice was a thread, but the accent had never changed. Poirot drew a chair close and sat. "How is this possible, mademoiselle?" She gave a dry laugh that ended in a cough. "After the cushion came down, I woke in darkness. Hands lifted me, carried me down the priest's hole. A doctor waited in the ice house. Heart stopped, he said, but not for long. Hamilton paid him to bring me back, not for love, for silence. He kept me prisoner in a cottage in Wales for 10 years. When he hanged, I was free, but too afraid to speak. I became a seamstress in Cardiff, Liverpool, Glasgow, always moving. The face you gave me was my curse and my shield. No one looked for a dead woman." She closed her eyes. "I watched from afar while hospitals rose in Eleanor's name. I watched girls become doctors because a woman I helped murder paid with her life. Every night I saw her real face, not the one I wore, and the child beside her. I have not slept since 1936, only short gray dozes, full of snow and roses on fire." Poirot took her thin hand. "Why call me now?" "Because I am tired, and because there is one last truth. The child did not die with Eleanor. She was born alive, small, blue, but alive. The clinic sold her. I have the papers, hidden all these years. She lives in Australia, married, 3 children. Her name is Anna Rose Carstairs, though she does not know it. Give her the pearl. Give her the story. Give her the mother. She never held her." From beneath the pillow, she drew a yellowed envelope sealed with red wax. Inside was a birth certificate, a lock of dark baby hair, and the blackened Baroque pearl David had once pressed into Poirot's hand. "Tell her, the woman who stole her mother's face kept her mother's heart, beating in secret. Tell her I burned the house so no more lies could grow there. Tell her I am sorry with every breath I was not allowed to take in 1936. Her fingers tightened on his. "Stay until the snow melts." Poirot stayed. For 9 days he sat by the narrow bed, reading French poetry aloud, while the old woman drifted in and out of the borderland that had been her only home for half a century. On the 10th morning, the nun found the bed empty, cover smooth, window open to a sky brilliant with spring. There was no body, only a single white rose on the pillow and a faint scent of bitter almonds that vanished when the window was closed. The envelope and its contents reached Australia 6 weeks later. A woman of 46 named Anna Rose Carstairs opened it in her kitchen while her youngest daughter practiced scales on an old piano. She read once, cried once, then placed the blackened Baroque pearl on the mantelpiece where the light caught it every afternoon. That same spring, a new rosebush appeared on the hill where Laurel Grange had stood. No one admitted planting it. It bore flowers of deep blood red with a blush of white at the heart. The villagers called it the sleepless rose, because its scent was strongest after midnight. And far away in London, Hercule Poirot, now very old, closed the file marked Laurel Grange for the final time. On the last page he wrote in his neat, rounded hand, "The locked room was never in the house. It was carried inside 3 women for the length of their lives. One escaped through fire. One escaped through forgiveness. One escaped through a spring morning when the snow finally melted." He laid down his pen, looked at the perfect curves of his mustache in the mirror, and allowed himself the smallest, saddest, most satisfied smile of his long career. Then he brewed a cup of chocolate tisane and waited quietly for whatever impossible crime tomorrow might bring.
Chapter 9. The Last Visitor. It was August 1975, 39 years to the day since the storm over Laurel Grange. Hercule Poirot was 96, perhaps 97, he no longer counted, and the world had become very quiet around him. He lived now in a small flat in Hampstead, looked after by a brisk Belgian nurse who pretended not to notice that he still dressed every morning as though Scotland Yard might telephone at any moment. On that particular afternoon, the sun poured through the open French windows and lay in golden squares across the carpet. Poirot sat in his chair, his hands folded over the head of his cane, watching dust motes dance like tiny memories. The doorbell rang once, politely. The nurse appeared. "There is a lady, monsieur. She says her name is Anna Rose Carstairs, and that you will remember the rose." Poirot's eyes brightened as though someone had turned up the wick of a lamp inside him. "Show her in, at once." She entered slowly, a woman in her early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and the same fearless smile he had once seen in a photograph taken at Niagara Falls. She wore a plain linen dress and carried a small bunch of blood-red roses tied with white ribbon. She did not offer her hand. Instead, she placed the roses in Poirot's lap and knelt, the way children do when they have traveled a very long way, to say thank you. "I promised my mother I would come when I was ready. I am ready now." Poirot touched the petals with trembling fingers. "You have her eyes, and something of the other one too. The courage that refuses sleep until the story is finished." Anna Rose sat on the low stool beside his chair. "I grew up believing I was orphaned in Vienna. I was happy. Good parents, music, sunshine. Then one day a letter came with a blackened pearl and a story that sounded like a fever dream. I thought someone was mad, but the pearl was real, and the hospital in Salzburg was real, and the rose bush on the hill was real. So I came to see the man who tied all the broken threads together." She paused, searching for words. "I needed to look at you and know that monsters can be beaten by very small men with perfect mustaches." Poirot gave a soft chuckle that ended in a cough. "The monsters were never very large, madame. Only the lies were large. The people were ordinary, frightened, greedy, loving, always loving in the wrong way." She reached into her bag and drew out a small framed photograph. It showed 3 generations, herself, her daughter, her granddaughter, all laughing on a beach under a southern sun. "This is what came out of the snow, monsieur. 3 women who carry Eleanor's blood and Ilse's stubborn heart. My granddaughter starts medical school next year. She will train in the hospital that bears my first mother's name. She will never know why the scholarship is called the Sleepless Rose, but she will live because of it." Poirot studied the faces for a long time. Then he said the thing he had never said to any client in 60 years of crime. "I am proud, madame. Proud and a little humbled. Usually I give the dead their names back. This time the dead gave me a family." Anna Rose leaned forward and kissed his forehead with the lightness of a child. "My mother, the one who carried me across the world, used to say that every story has 3 endings. The one people see, the one the newspapers print, and the one that keeps growing quietly long after everyone thinks it is finished. You made sure our story had the 3rd ending." She rose. "I will not tire you longer, but I only came to bring the roses and to say the name aloud in the presence of the man who kept it safe. Eleanor Carstairs Hamilton, my mother, my ghost, my beginning." Poirot lifted one hand in blessing or farewell.
Tell your granddaughter that when she is tired in the operating theater at 3 in the morning, she should remember there was once a woman who did not sleep for 40 years so that she could stand there at 3 in the morning, saving someone else. That is the strength she carries in her wrists. Anna Rose smiled through sudden tears, turned, and left as quietly as she had come. The nurse returned later and found Poirot asleep in the sunlight, the red roses still in his lap, their scent filling the room like forgiveness that had finally arrived on time. He did not wake again. 3 days later, they buried him in the small Belgian cemetery he had chosen years earlier. On the stone, beneath his name and the dates, they engraved the line he had dictated long ago. He gave the dead their names back. At the foot of the grave, someone left a single white rose and a single red one, tied together with a thin strand of blackened pearls. And in Salzburg, on the hill where Laurel Grange once stood, the 2 rose bushes, red and white, had grown into one another over the decades until no one could tell where one ended and the other began. They flowered together every spring, fragrant after midnight, sleepless and unafraid, keeping watch over an empty space that was no longer empty at all. The secret room had become a garden. And the story, the third ending Anna Rose spoke of, simply went on blooming.
Chapter 10. The Garden That Remembers. They found the last letter after Poirot's death tucked inside the leather wallet he had carried since 1936. It was addressed to no one and to everyone, written in his small, perfect handwriting on a single sheet of Whitehaven Mansion's notepaper dated the night before he died. My friends, if you are reading this, Hercule Poirot has taken his final bow. Do not mourn too long. The little gray cells grew tired, but they leave behind a confession, and a confession within the confession. Everything you believed about Laurel Grange was true, yet nothing was exactly as it seemed. There was never a false Eleanor created in a Vienna clinic. There was never a real Eleanor who died and was replaced. There was only one woman from the beginning to the end. Eleanor Carstairs Hamilton discovered in 1934 that she had 6 months to live. She also discovered that her husband Geoffrey had forged her signature on documents that would leave the entire fortune to him upon her death. She loved him still, foolishly, desperately, and she could not bear the thought that her death would expose him as a thief and send him to prison. So she invented the perfect vanishing act. She paid Dr. Erich von Alten, who truly existed, to spread the rumor that he could remake a face. She paid Ilse von Hoffen, the actress, to disappear entirely. She paid nurses and orderlies and grave diggers to look the other way. Then, in the Austrian clinic, she staged her own death, had herself declared dead under another name, and returned to England wearing subtle bandages and the story of a miraculous cure. The woman who came home from the sanatorium was always Eleanor, only Eleanor, with a new will signed while she was supposedly recovering, a will that left everything to Geoffrey because she still believed love could redeem him. But love could not. Geoffrey grew frightened that one day she would change the will back. He began to poison her slowly, small doses of digitalis disguised as heart tonic, planning to finish her when the moment was perfect. Eleanor understood at last. On the night of the storm in 1936, she locked and bolted her bedroom door, dissolved a fatal amount of cyanide in a glass, drank it, and lay down to die exactly where she knew Geoffrey would find her. She arranged the scene so perfectly,
bolts drawn, key outside, harmless trace of poison remaining, that no suspicion could ever fall on him. She died to protect the man who was killing her. That was the first death. Geoffrey, stunned by the perfection of her silence, lost his nerve. He could not bear the fortune now. It felt cursed. He hanged himself in prison after confessing to a murder that had never happened. The second death was Mary Donovan, killed by Claire Lambert for cheap melodrama. That crime was exactly as I told it. The third death was Ilse von Hoffen, the actress without a stage, who truly did live hidden in Wales for a decade, paid to stay dead. When Geoffrey died, she was freed, wandered Europe, and ended her days in the Eleanor Carstairs Hospital under the care of the nuns, carrying the guilt of having agreed, for money, to lend her face to a lie that never needed her after all. The child was real. Eleanor bore her in the clinic and gave her away so that no scandal would follow the infant. The girl grew up in Australia as Honor Rose, never knowing she was heir to £20 million and a garden of ghosts. I, Hercule Poirot, discovered the truth piece by piece over 40 years. I found the forged clinic records in 1946, the paid witnesses in 1959, Eleanor's own diary hidden behind a loose brick in the priest's hole in 1963. Each time I could have spoken, each time I chose silence. Why? Because Eleanor's last gift to the world was the hospital and the scholarships. If I had revealed that the benefactress had staged her own suicide to shield a criminal husband, every brick bearing her name would have been torn down in disgust. Thousands of women would have lost the chance to become doctors. I decided the living were more important than the dead. So I became the final keeper of the secret room. I let the legend grow, false Eleanor, perfect surgery, murdered substitute, because a beautiful lie sometimes heals better than an ugly truth. Only 4 people ever knew every lair: Eleanor, who planned it; Geoffrey, who failed it; Ilse, who almost played it; and Hercule Poirot, who buried it. Now I am the last. Plant no statue for me. Water the roses on the hill where the house stood. When the white and the red bloom together, you will smell bitter almonds and mountain snow and forgiveness all at once. That is monument enough. Tell the gardeners never to separate the 2 bushes. They are one woman embracing herself across a lifetime of impossible choices. And when young doctors walk past the plaque that bears her name, let them think only this: a woman loved greatly, sinned greatly, and paid greatly, so that they might hold a scalpel without trembling. That is the whole truth. The rest was silence. Adieu. Hercule Poirot, August 1975. The letter was read once, in private, by the executor, a quiet Belgian solicitor who had known Poirot since boyhood. He carried it to the hill above the village the very next spring. There he dug a small hole between the tangled roots of the red and white roses, placed the paper inside a tin box along with the blackened Baroque pearl, and covered it forever. No announcement was made, no book was written. The world kept the beautiful lie. But on certain evenings after midnight, when the moon is full and the scent is strongest, those who walk the path say they have seen 3 women standing among the roses, one in midnight blue silk, one in a plain black dress, one in the white coat of a young doctor just beginning her rounds. They never speak. They only smile at one another, touch hands briefly, and fade before dawn. The garden remembers everything.
and the secret room, at long last, has no walls left to hold anyone prisoner. The end.